The whisper was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a serpent hissing in the quiet hallway of our perfect brick house in Cincinnati, a promise of a horror I already knew too well. He said it. My father, my handsome, charming, monstrous father, Tyler, he had just come from my older sister's room, a place I knew had become a chamber of silent suffering. He paused at my doorway, his shadow falling across my bed, and he leaned in, his breath smelling of stale coffee and something rotten that lived inside him. "You're next," he whispered, and then he smiled, a terrible knowing smile that sealed my childhood in a tomb. I froze. In that moment, the world stopped turning. I was 10 years old, and I understood everything. I understood the bruises my sister Monica tried to hide. I understood the hollowed-out look in her eyes. I understood the reason she had stopped laughing, and I understood that my mother Nancy, with her perfectly starched aprons and her bright, brittle smile, was not a protector. She was a ward. She was the one who locked the doors at night, not to keep the monsters out, but to keep them in. They thought they had us trapped, two silent, broken dolls in their perfect suburban dollhouse. They thought my fear would paralyze me forever. They didn't know that terror, when it becomes absolute, can curdle into a kind of courage. They didn't know that the little girl frozen in her bed was already planning a war. They had whispered a threat, but I was about to scream a truth so loud it would bring their entire world crashing down around them. It all started in a house that lied to the world. From the street it was a picture of American prosperity, with its neatly trimmed hedges and a welcoming front porch. Inside it was a kingdom ruled by the volatile moods of my father and the brittle anxieties of my mother. Nancy's love was a transaction. It was earned through obedience, through quietness, through my ability to be an unobtrusive accessory to the perfect family she was trying to project. Her highest compliment was, "Margaret is such a good, quiet girl." My father, Tyler, was the sun around which our family revolved. He was handsome, charismatic, and loved by everyone in our church and our community. He was a god in our home, and my mother was his most devout worshiper. His word was law. His comfort was paramount. His needs superseded all else. My sister Monica was 2 years older than me. She was the brave one, the one with a spark of rebellion in her eyes that I had always admired and feared. She was the one who would question, who would push back, and for that she became the primary target of my father's special brand of attention. I was the quiet one, the observer. I learned early on to read the subtle shifts in the emotional atmosphere of our home. I could tell by the way my father's car crunched on the gravel driveway what kind of evening it would be. I could tell by the tightness in my mother's smile whether I should make myself scarce. I became an expert at invisibility, a ghost in my own child. The darkness began subtly, as it so often does. It started with touches that lingered too long, with jokes that weren't funny, with a possessiveness over Monica that my mother dismissed as paternal affection. "He just adores his firstborn," Nancy would say with a proud smile, ignoring the flicker of fear in Monica's eyes. I saw it though. I saw the way Monica would flinch when he entered a room. I saw the way she would find excuses to not be alone with him. I saw the light in her begin to dim, snuffed out by a secret she was too terrified to name. I was a child, but I was not a fool. I knew that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong in the heart of our perfect brick house. The air was thick with a truth no one was allowed to speak, and the silence was beginning to choke us all. The shift from unsettling to monstrous happened without a sound. There was no single, dramatic event, just a slow, creeping violation that became the new normal in our home. My father's attention on Monica intensified. He began to control every aspect of her life. He would critique her clothes, her friends, her grades. He would insist on driving her everywhere, his presence a constant menacing shadow. The excuse was always love, always protection. "The world is a dangerous place for a pretty girl," he would say to my mother, and she would nod in fervent agreement, completely blind to the fact that the greatest danger to her daughter was sleeping in her own bed. Monica began to change. The spark in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a dull, haunted look. She stopped seeing her friends. She quit the soccer team. She spent most of her time in her room, the door closed, a fortress of solitude that he would inevitably breach. I would hear their voices through the wall, his a low, persuasive murmur, hers a series of monosyllabic, defeated replies. I never heard her scream. I think that was the most terrifying part. The abuse was so complete, so insidious, that it had stolen her voice. She began to have bruises, small, faint marks on her arms, and her back, that she would try to hide with long-sleeved shirts, even in the sweltering Houston heat. One afternoon, I saw a particularly dark one on her wrist, as she reached for a glass in the kitchen. "What happened?" I whispered, my heart pounding. She pulled her sleeve down quickly, her eyes darting towards the living room where my mother was. "I fell," she mumbled, not looking at me. "I'm just clumsy." We both knew it was a lie. Later that day, I found the courage to approach my mother. She was in the garden, tending to her prize-winning roses, her hands protected by pristine white gloves. "Mom," I began, my voice trembling, "I'm worried about Monica. She has bruises." Nancy didn't look up from her pruning. "Your sister is a clumsy girl," she said, her voice a flat, dismissive line. "She needs to be more careful." "But Mom, I don't want to hear it, Margaret." She cut me off, her tone turning sharp. "Do not start telling tales about your sister, and do not, under any circumstances, bother your father with this nonsense. He has enough on his mind." The message was clear. See nothing, say nothing, protect the illusion at all costs. The house became a pressure cooker of secrets and fear. The air was thick with a tension so palpable, it felt like I was breathing water. I lived in a state of constant low-grade terror, not just for my sister, but for myself. I knew, with the primal, instinctual certainty of a prey animal, that my father's appetites were not confined to just one of his daughters. His eyes would sometimes linger on me a moment too long. He would accidentally brush against me in the hallway, a touch that would make my skin crawl. I was the understudy in this horrific play, waiting in the wings for my turn on the stage. My childhood was a performance of normalcy for the outside world. I did my chores, I got good grades, I was polite and quiet, but inside, I was a silent, screaming witness to the slow-motion destruction of my sister, and I was utterly, completely alone, trapped in a house, with a monster, an enabler, and a sister who was fading away, before my very eyes. The moment the whisper found my ear, my world split into two distinct periods. The time before I knew for certain, and the terrifying, endless after. It was a Thursday evening. My father had just come out of Monica's room. He had been in there for over an hour. The low murmur of his voice, a constant menacing hum, through her closed door. I was in the hallway, pretending to read a book for school, but my entire being was focused on that door, on the silence that felt louder than a scream. When he finally emerged, he looked different. His face was flushed, and there was a strange, triumphant gleam in his eyes that made my blood run cold. He saw me sitting on the floor, and he paused. He walked over to me, his footsteps unnervingly silent on the carpet. I kept my eyes fixed on the page of my book, my heart hammering against my ribs, like a trapped bird. He crouched down beside me, his presence a suffocating cloud of his cheap cologne, and something else, something dark and sour. He leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. "You're next," he whispered, the words a hot, poisonous dart that shot straight into my soul. Then he stood up, chuckled softly, to himself, and walked down the stairs as if he had just commented on the weather. I remained frozen on the floor, the book fallen from my hands, the words he had spoken echoing in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. "You're next." It was not just a threat. It was a promise. It was a confirmation of the terror I had been living with for years. It was the moment my vague, childish fears coalesced into a sharp, terrifying certainty. I was no longer just a witness to my sister's torment. I was the next victim in line. I scrambled to my feet and ran to my sister's room. I knocked softly. "Monica," I whispered. There was no answer. I tried the knob. It was locked. "Monica, please." "It's me," I pleaded, my voice cracking. I heard a faint sound from inside, the sound of a girl trying to stifle a sob. The sound broke my heart. I ran downstairs, my mind racing. I had to tell my mother. I had to make her see. This time it wasn't a bruise I could explain away. This was a direct threat. This was a line that even she, in her fortress of denial, could not ignore. I found her in the kitchen, wiping down the already spotless countertops, her movements brisk and efficient, a woman at war with any speck of dust that dared to mar her perfect world. "Mom," I said, my voice high and tight with panic. "Dad, Margaret, I have told you 1,000 times not to run in this house," she said, not even turning around, "and use your indoor voice. But Mom, you have to listen to me," I insisted, grabbing her arm. She spun around, her face a mask of annoyance. "What is it, Margaret? What is so important that it can't wait until I have finished my chores?" "It's Dad," I said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "He was in Monica's room, and when he came out, he said, I looked at her, my eyes wide with terror, expecting to see a flicker of maternal concern, of protective rage. I saw nothing. Her face remained a cold, impassive mask. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my face, as if searching for some sign of a lie. Then she sighed, a long, weary sound of a woman who was tired of being bothered. "Margaret, I have had just about enough of your fantasies," she said, her voice like ice. "You are desperate for attention, and you are willing to say anything to get it. You are trying to cause trouble between your father and me, and I will not have it." "It's not a fantasy," I cried, the injustice of her words a fresh wave of pain. "He said it. He's hurting Monica, and he's going to hurt me." "That is enough," she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. She grabbed a dish rag from the sink and threw it at me. "Stop lying and do the dishes," she commanded, her voice a final brutal verdict. "And if I hear one more word of this ridiculous, wicked story, you will be grounded for a month. Do you understand?" I stood there, frozen, the wet dish rag at my feet, the smell of bleach and betrayal filling the air. She had done it again. She had chosen him. She had chosen the lie. She had looked at my terror and called it a fantasy. She had sentenced both of her daughters to a monster, and she was going to stand guard at the door of our prison cell. I turned, a small, silent soldier of 10, and I walked to the sink. And as I washed the dishes, my tears falling silently into the soapy water, I realized that I was truly, finally, on my own. There was no one to save us. If we were going to survive, I would have to be the one to find a way out. The days following my father's whispered threat were a new kind of hell. The house, which had always been a place of quiet, simmering tension, now felt like a ticking time bomb. I lived in a state of constant, heightened alert, my senses attuned to the slightest sound, the slightest shift in the atmosphere. Every creak of the floorboards, every door that closed down the hall, sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through me. My father, Tyler, seemed to delight in my fear. He had been unmasked, and he no longer felt the need to hide his monstrousness behind a veneer of paternal affection. He would watch me with a cold, predatory amusement, his eyes holding a secret promise of the violence to come. He would find small, cruel ways to remind me of his power. He would corner me in the hallway, blocking my path, and just stand there, smiling his terrible, knowing smile, until I was forced to squeeze past him, his body brushing against mine. He would accidentally walk in on me when I was changing. He would make comments about my body, his words like slimy, crawling things on my skin. He was enjoying the game, the slow, sadistic torture of my anticipation. My mother, Nancy, was his willing accomplice. After my final failed attempt to make her see the truth, she had doubled down on her denial. She treated me with a new level of coldness and suspicion. I was no longer just a difficult child. I was a malicious liar, a threat to the fragile peace of her perfect home. She punished me for the smallest infractions, her anger a constant, simmering presence, a dish not washed to her standards, a chore forgotten, a book left out of place. All were met with a sharp word or a stinging slap. It was as if she was trying to beat the truth out of me, to punish me into accepting her version of reality. My sister Monica and I became silent co-conspirators in our own survival. We didn't need to speak of the horror,
It was the air we breathed. We communicated in glances, in small, almost imperceptible gestures. I would see her watching me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a heartbreaking, protective pity. She knew I was next, and the knowledge was another weight on her already overburdened soul. She tried to protect me in small ways. She would insist on doing the evening chores with me, ensuring we were not left alone with him. She would find reasons for me to be out of the house, sending me on long, unnecessary errands to the Target or the library. She was fighting a desperate, losing battle to keep the monster at bay, and I loved her for it, with a fiercity that was both beautiful and terrifying. The house became our prison, and my bedroom, my own small space, became the most dangerous place in it. I started barricading the door at night, pushing my heavy oak dresser in front of it. It was a flimsy defense. I knew, if he wanted to get in, he would, but it was a small act of defiance, a way of screaming no, in a house where my voice had no power. I slept in my clothes, a small bag packed with a change of underwear, and my toothbrush hidden under my bed. I was a soldier in a war zone, always ready for the final assault. The injustice of it all was a constant burning fire in my gut. I was a child, I was in my own home, and I was living in a state of terror that no child should ever have to know. My parents, the two people in the world who were supposed to protect me, were my captors. I raised you better. The phrase my mother would use on me for the smallest transgression was a cruel, twisted joke. She had not raised me at all. She had raised him, and she had sacrificed both of her daughters to do it. The fear was a constant companion, but beneath it, something else was beginning to grow. It was a cold, hard diamond bright resolve. I would not let him do to me what he had done to my sister. I would not let them break me. I would not let them win. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I knew, with a certainty that was as deep and as real as my fear, that I was going to find a way out. I was going to burn their perfect, lying house to the ground, and I was going to dance in the ashes.
The seed of my escape was planted by a book. It was a worn, dog-eared copy of The Count of Monte Cristo that I had checked out from the school library. I read it in secret, huddled under my covers at night with a flashlight, my bedroom door barricaded with my dresser. The story of Edmond Dantes, a man unjustly imprisoned, who spends years meticulously planning his escape and his ultimate devastating revenge, became my Bible. I was not a man in a French prison, but I was a prisoner nonetheless, and the story gave me something I hadn't had before, a blueprint. It taught me that the most powerful revenge is not born from hot-headed anger, but from cold, patient, and meticulous planning. It taught me that the greatest weapon against an arrogant enemy is to let them believe they have already won. I began to watch my parents not as a terrified child, but as a student of my own captivity. I studied their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. I learned that my mother left her purse on the kitchen counter every night, and that she often had a few stray dollars tucked into a side pocket. I learned that my father kept a hidden stash of cash in an old coffee can in the garage, his poker money, as he called it. I started to collect these small things, $1 here, a $5 bill there, hiding them in a hollowed-out book on my shelf. It was a pittance, but it was a beginning. It was my treasure, my war chest. My greatest challenge was finding an ally, someone on the outside who could help me. I had no friends I could trust. My extended family all lived in other states, and they were all firmly under my mother's sphere of influence. Any call for help would be immediately reported back to her, and the consequences would be unthinkable. But then I remembered a woman from our church, a woman my mother actively disliked. Her name was Mrs. Gable. She was an elderly widow who lived a few blocks away, a woman my mother dismissed as a nosy busybody. But I remembered her differently. I remembered her as the one person who would always look me in the eye, who would ask me how I was doing, and actually wait for an answer. I remembered the kindness in her weathered face. I decided she was a risk I had to take. I started finding excuses to walk past her house on my way home from school. For weeks I just walked by, my heart pounding, my courage failing me. But one afternoon, she was outside, tending to her garden. She saw me and smiled, a genuine, warm smile that was so foreign in my world. "Hello, Margaret," she said. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? I stopped, my hands clutching the straps of my backpack. The words came out in a rush, a torrent of fear and desperation. I need help, I whispered, my voice trembling. My father, I'm not safe. I didn't have to say more. She looked at me, at my thin frame, at the dark circles under my eyes, at the terror that I knew was written all over my face. The kindness in her eyes did not falter. It deepened. She didn't ask questions. She didn't express doubt. She just nodded slowly. Come inside, child, she said, her voice a low, steady anchor in my storm-tossed world. Let's have a cup of tea. That afternoon, in her small, sun-filled kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and old books, I told her everything, the whole sordid, ugly story. I told her about my brother, about my father, about my mother's denial, about the whisper in the hallway. I cried, for the first time in front of another person, the silent, shoulder-shaking sobs of a child who had carried an impossible burden for too long. Mrs. Gable listened without interruption. She just sat there, her hand resting on mine, her presence a quiet, unshakable fortress of belief. When I was done, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "They will not win, Margaret. We will not let them." She was the first soldier in my army. She was a retired social worker, a woman who knew the system, who knew the language of intervention. She knew who to call, what to say. She became my secret general, my co-conspirator. The plan we hatched was simple and terrifying. We would not confront my parents directly. That was too dangerous. We would document, we would gather evidence, and then we would orchestrate an escape so clean and so final that they would not know what hit them until it was too late. I was no longer just a victim. I was a strategist, and my war for survival had finally, truly begun. The months that followed were a dangerous high-stakes game of espionage. I was a spy in my own home, living a double life. To my family, I was the same quiet, compliant, and slightly sullen girl. But in secret, I was an intelligence agent, meticulously gathering the evidence that would one day set me and my sister free. Mrs. Gable became my handler. We would meet in secret at the public library, our conversations whispered over dusty books in the history section. She taught me what to look for, what to document. She gave me a small, spiral notebook, and it became my most precious possession. In it I recorded everything, every threat my father made, every time he cornered me or Monica, every cruel word my mother spoke, every bruise I saw on my sister's arm. I wrote down dates, times, and direct quotes. The notebook was a damning testament to the quiet, daily horror of our lives, a secret history of a war no one else could see. Mrs. Gable also taught me about a powerful, invisible weapon, the tape recorder. She bought me a small, microcassette recorder from a pawn shop, the kind that was barely bigger than a credit card. "Keep this with you at all times," she instructed. "If he threatens you, if he corners you, if your mother says something cruel, turn it on. A child's word can be dismissed. A recording cannot." The tape recorder became my shield. I kept it in my pocket, my finger always near the record button. The first time I used it was a terrifying leap of faith. My father had me cornered in the kitchen, his voice a low, menacing growl, telling me what a disappointment I was, how I was turning out just like all the other cheap girls. My hand was trembling in my pocket, but I pressed the button. The tiny, almost imperceptible click of the machine starting was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I captured his voice, his words, the venom in his tone. It was the first piece of hard evidence, the first brick in the wall of my case against him. My sister, Monica, was my silent accomplice. I didn't tell her about Mrs. Gable, or our plan. It was too dangerous. If my parents suspected she was involved, her life would become even more unbearable. But she knew something had changed in me. She saw the new, hard glint of resolve in my eyes, and she began to help me in her own quiet ways. She would create diversions, drawing my father's attention away from me when he was in one of his moods. She would accidentally spill something in the kitchen, forcing my mother to focus on cleaning up a mess instead of interrogating me. We were two soldiers in the same foxhole, fighting a silent war for our survival. While I was gathering evidence, Mrs. Gable was laying the groundwork on the outside. She contacted a friend of hers who worked for Child Protective Services, not to file a formal report yet, but to get advice, to understand the process. She spoke to a lawyer who specialized in family law, a woman who agreed to consult with us pro bono. We were building an army, a secret network of allies, who were waiting for the signal to act. The tension in the house was almost unbearable. My father seemed to sense a shift in me, a subtle change in the balance of power. My fear was still there, but it was now overlaid with a thin, brittle layer of defiance, and it infuriated him. His taunts became more frequent, his presence more menacing. He was trying to break me, to push me back into the box of a terrified, compliant child. He didn't know that every cruel word, every threatening gesture, was just another piece of evidence I was carefully collecting, another nail he was hammering into his own coffin. I was walking a tightrope, and a single misstep could mean disaster. But I was no longer the same girl who had frozen in the hallway. I was a soldier, I was a strategist, I was the keeper of a terrible, powerful truth, and I was getting ready to bring the entire, rotten house down. The final confrontation was not a dramatic, shouting match in the living room. It was a quiet, meticulously planned operation, executed with the precision of a military strike. The catalyst was a phone call. My father, in a fit of rage, over a bad grade on one of Tyler's report cards, had cornered my sister in her room. I heard the door slam, heard the lock click. I heard my mother in the hallway outside her door, her voice a sharp, hissing whisper, "Just do what he says, Monica. Don't make it worse." And then, I heard a sound that broke through every wall I had ever built around my heart. I heard my sister, for the first time, cry out. Not a sob, but a single sharp, terrified no. That was the signal. That was the moment the war went from cold to hot. I grabbed the tape recorder from my pocket and pressed I crept to my sister's door and held the small device against the wood, capturing the sound of my father's angry, muffled voice, my mother's placating whispers, my sister's terrified sobs. It was the final damning piece of evidence we needed. I ran to my room, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I grabbed the backpack I had kept packed for weeks, a go bag that held my notebook, the tape recorder, the small stash of money I had saved, and a change of clothes. I climbed out my bedroom window, dropping silently into the soft bushes below, a move I had practiced in my mind 1,000 times. I ran through the quiet, suburban streets of Houston, my feet pounding against the pavement, the sound of my sister's cry echoing in my ears. I ran all the way to Mrs. Gable's house, my lungs burning, my mind a chaotic whirl of terror, and a strange, fierce exhilaration. I was free. Mrs. Gable was waiting for me. She took one look at my face, at the wild terror in my eyes, and she didn't hesitate. She ushered me inside, locked the door, and immediately got on the phone. "It's time," was all she said. Within the hour, her small, quiet living room had become a war room. Her friend from Child Protective Services was there, a calm, no-nonsense woman, named Sarah. The lawyer, Miss Albright, arrived shortly after, her briefcase full of the documents we had been preparing for months. I played them the tape. I showed them my notebook. I told them what had just happened. The mood in the room was grim, resolute. The police were called, but this was not going to be a simple wellness check. This was going to be an intervention. Miss Albright insisted on going with them. "I want to be there when they are confronted with the truth," she said, her voice like ice. "I want to see their faces when they realize the game is over." And so, as the sun began to set, a small, quiet army descended on the perfect brick house at the end of my street. 2 police cars, a social worker, and a formidable lawyer. They did not knock. They had a warrant. They walked through the front door that I had just escaped, and they brought the full weight of the law and the truth into the house of lies I had called home. I was not there to see it. Miss Gable had insisted I stay with her, safe in her fortress of kindness, but I could imagine the scene. I could imagine the look on my mother's face as her perfect world came crashing down. I could imagine the sputtering denials of my father
as he was confronted with a reality he could no longer control. They had thought they were the keepers of the secrets. They had no idea that their quiet, broken daughter had just become the keeper of their fate. The story of what happened inside the house that evening was relayed to me later by Miss Albright. Her voice, a calm, dispassionate narrative of a battle won. The police and social workers had found my sister, Monica, locked in her room, her face tear-stained and bruised. My father, Tyler, had tried to bluster his way through it, turning on his charismatic charm, painting a picture of a difficult, hysterical teenage daughter. My mother, Nancy, had played her part to perfection, wringing her hands and speaking of my troubled imagination, my history of telling lies, but their performance crumbled in the face of the evidence. Miss Albright had played the tape recording, the sound of my father's rage and my sister's sobs, filling the perfectly decorated living room. She had presented them with my notebook, a meticulous, damning record of their years of abuse and neglect. She had informed them that Monica would be taken for a full medical examination, and that I, their other lying daughter, was already in protective custody, and had given a full statement to the police. The color drained from their face. Their carefully constructed world of lies and denial was collapsing around them, and the walls of their perfect home had become the walls of their prison. My father was arrested on the spot. He was charged with a litany of crimes so long and so ugly that it made me sick to my stomach to hear them listed. My mother was also taken into custody, charged with child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and being an accomplice to her husband's monstrous crime. They were taken from their home in handcuffs, their public humiliation, as complete and as absolute as the private hell they had created for their children. The house, the one they had valued more than their own daughters, was sealed as a crime scene. Monica was taken to a hospital, and then to a temporary foster home, safe for the first time in years, and I, in the quiet sanctuary of Mrs. Gable's living room, finally allowed myself to breathe. The legal battle that followed was long and brutal. My parents hired expensive lawyers, who tried to paint me and Monica as vindictive, manipulative liars. They tried to discredit my testimony, my evidence, my very sanity. But the truth, once it is finally let out into the light, is a powerful, unyielding thing. The tape recordings were undeniable. Monica's medical records were irrefutable. My notebook, with its years of meticulous documentation, was a silent, powerful witness. The final nail in their coffin was my testimony. I stood in a courtroom, a young woman now, no longer a terrified child, and I looked my parents in the eye, and I told the truth. I told the story of my sister's suffering. I told the story of my mother's betrayal. I told the story of my father's monstrousness. I did not cry. I did not shout. My voice was calm, and clear, and unshakable. And in the end, they were convicted. My father was sentenced to a long prison term, a sentence that would ensure he would never harm another child again. My mother received a shorter, but still significant sentence. They lost everything: their home, their money, their reputation, their freedom. The perfect family they had built on a foundation of our pain was now nothing more than a pile of rubble. The poetic justice was not a source of joy for me, but it was a source of a deep, profound, and solemn peace. They had tried to bury us, but they had only succeeded in burying themselves. The years after the trial were a slow, difficult, but ultimately triumphant process of rebuilding. Monica and I, now legally emancipated minors under the care of the state, were placed in the same therapeutic foster home. For the first time in our lives, we were safe, we were together, and we began to heal. It was not easy. The scars of our childhood were deep, and the ghosts of our past were not easily banished. There were nightmares, there were panic attacks, there were days when the weight of what we had endured felt too heavy to bear, but we had each other. We were two survivors, two soldiers, who had fought a long and brutal war, and we were determined to build a new life out of the ashes of our old one. We both threw ourselves into our studies, finding a sense of purpose and control in education that we had never known at home. We both excelled, earning scholarships to good universities, a world away from the suffocating confines of Houston. I predictably majored in finance. My love for the clean, cold logic of numbers, a direct antidote to the chaotic, emotional violence of my childhood. Monica, in a beautiful act of defiance, chose to study law. She wanted to become the person we had so desperately needed. As children, a fierce, unwavering advocate for the voiceless, we built new lives for ourselves, lives that were quiet and stable, and most importantly, we had small apartments, a close-knit circle of friends, and the profound, daily peace of knowing that we were safe. We had succeeded. We had survived. My mother was released from prison. After a few years, she tried to contact us once. A single, rambling letter, filled with self-pity and blame. She never once said she was sorry for what she had done, only for what had happened to her. We did not write back. She was a ghost from a past we had worked too hard to escape. My father, I heard, died in prison. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No sadness, no triumph, just a quiet, final closing of a dark and painful chapter. The house, our childhood home, the scene of so many horrors, was eventually sold in a state auction. The proceeds were placed in a trust for me and Monica, a final, ironic inheritance from the estate of the people who had tried to destroy us. We used the money not for ourselves, but to start a foundation. We call it the Next Foundation, in honor of the whispered threat that had been the catalyst for our escape. It provides funding for legal aid, services, and emergency shelters for children in abusive homes. We took the ugliest moment of our lives and transformed it into a legacy of hope and protection for others. We took the poison and we made it into medicine. I sit now in the quiet, sun-drenched living room of my own home in Chicago. It is a small, peaceful space, filled with books and plants and the gentle, comforting presence of my sleeping cat. I am a successful financial analyst, a woman who has built a life of security and independence on her own terms. My sister Monica is a brilliant and formidable lawyer for the Public Defender's Office, a warrior for the broken and the voiceless. We are close, she and I, bound by a bond that was forged in the fires of a shared trauma. We are survivors. We are warriors. We are whole. I often think about that little girl, the one who sat frozen on the floor of a hallway in Houston, a whispered threat echoing in her ears. I wish I could go back and tell her that she would be okay. I wish I could tell her that her fear would one day become her courage, that her silence would one day find its voice, that her pain would one day become her purpose. I wish I could tell her that the monster would not win. My story is not a happy one. It is a story of profound and unimaginable betrayal, but it is also a story of resilience, of survival, of the quiet, unshakable power that can be found in even the most broken of heart. It is a testament to the fact that even when the people who are supposed to love you most try to destroy you, you can still choose to live. You can still choose to fight, and you can still choose to win. My parents thought they had buried me and my sister alive in their house of secret, but they were wrong. They had only planted the seeds of two tenacious, unbreakable trees, and our roots were just too strong to be contained by their darkness. We grew towards the light, and we are still growing, a testament not to their cruelty, but to our own enduring, indomitable will to survive.